Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Village Laguna October General Meeting. We're unfortunately starting off on a rather sad note. Most of you know by now that Arnold passed away yesterday. And at this point, other than what Charlotte commented, is we're kind of waiting for his son to come in, hopefully by the weekend, and then maybe more information will be available. And of course, that information will be shared. Arnold helped start something wonderful here in Laguna, and those ideals and passions for our town remain with us today. Please join me for a moment of silence to reflect on his many contributions and perhaps visualize what we can do to maintain Arnold's legacy of our village atmosphere as we move into the next 50 years of Village Laguna. Thank you. Tonight, our presentations are both topics Arnold would have considered very important. First is about keeping city business transparent, and the second about ensuring thoughtful development in our town. It's my pleasure to introduce Kurt Weiss, and Kurt is a lawyer and a Village Laguna board member. And he's going to do his presentation in two parts, and he will take questions at the end of the first part of his presentation, and then again at the end of the second. If you want, while he's talking, you can of course put your questions into the chat, but otherwise he will take questions at the end. And with that, I'd like to give you Kurt. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Ann. I have some PowerPoint slides, so I'm going to share my screen with you. So if you all bear with me just for a second. So my presentation tonight is on the Brown Act, which is California's open meeting law for local government. There's a lot of information on the internet about the Brown Act, but these are the key resources. And the first two of those, I know the Village Laguna board members have seen because Meg Monahan passed them around. And she got it exactly right. Those are the two key documents that you want to turn to for a better understanding of the Brown Act. The first is the more timely of the two. There's a 2016 version of it. The Attorney General's open meeting pamphlet is getting a little long in the tooth. And then, of course, if you have a Brown Act issue, you always want to look at the Brown Act itself, which is starts at Government Code Section 54950. The Brown Act was signed into law by Governor Earl Warren in 1953, and its purpose is stated in the preamble to the Brown Act. And there are really two key thoughts here. One is the importance of community involvement in government, and then secondly, for that to happen, government proceedings must be open and public. And it's important to keep this purpose in mind when looking at the Brown Act, because Brown Act provisions will be interpreted according to how well they promote this purpose. Okay, so my presentation tonight, my goal is first to provide you with a better understanding of the City Council's recent Brown Act violations and Village Laguna's role in identifying and correcting those violations. I'll start with an overview of the Brown Act, focusing on the parts of the act that the City Council violated, which are the closed session provisions of the Brown Act. I have a bigger goal, though, for tonight's presentation, and that's that by the end of the presentation tonight, you should be in a pretty good position to spot most Brown Act violations committed by the city council. And that way you can play a role in getting the city council to comply with the Brown Act. So that's my goal, to make you better informed and more active members of the community, which really is the only way to get the city back on track regarding the Brown Act. So let me first tell you a little bit about my background and why you should take me seriously when I talk about the Brown Act. I have 30 years experience working with the Brown Act as an attorney with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the air pollution control agency for Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. For my final 13 years at the agency, I was the general counsel, and one of my key jobs was advising the agency's governing board about the Brown Act. The agency had a 13-member governing board. It was made up primarily of local public officials, members of boards of supervisors and city councils in the 4 counties that we regulated. The agency was under a lot of scrutiny, both from environmental organizations and from industry. And so it was really important that I appropriately advised the governing board on the Brown Act. In the 13 years that I was general counsel, we got sued a lot. We got sued by industry groups, we got sued by environmental groups, but we never got sued for a Brown Act violation. In fact, we never got the kind of letter that Village Laguna sent to the city, a cure and correct letter pointing out that there were violations. Nor did I ever get a letter from a district attorney saying that the agency had gone off the tracks with regard to the Brown Act. Okay, so let's start with an overview of the Brown Act. And the Brown Act is actually pretty straightforward if you keep in mind the 3 fundamental Brown Act requirements. Everything in the Brown Act ties back to one of these 3 requirements. Members of the public have a right to be notified of public meetings, they have a right to attend public meetings, and they have a right to comment at public meetings. These 3 rights all involve public meetings, so a key thing that we need to understand for purposes of the Brown Act is what constitutes a public meeting under the Brown Act. And the courts have adopted an extremely broad interpretation of what counts as a Brown Act meeting. If there's a communication involving a quorum of the city council, and I'm going to use the city council as my example here tonight. In fact, the Laguna Beach City Council, which is a 5-member body, it has a 3-member quorum. So if 3 members of the Laguna Beach City Council participate or are involved in a communication regarding city business, then a Brown Act meeting has occurred and the Brown Act requirements must be met, or the meeting's an illegal meeting. So let me give you a couple quick examples. 3 members of the city council bump into one another on a street corner, and they start talking about city business. A Brown Act meeting has occurred, and obviously these 3 requirements aren't going to be met, so the meeting's an illegal meeting. So what if the city council members just passively receive information? Let's say that 3 members of the city council get invited to a Liberate Laguna board meeting. And knowing about the Brown Act and knowing that the city's caught some heat recently because of the Brown Act, they tell the powers that be at Liberate Laguna, look, we'll come to your board meeting, but we're not going to say anything. We're just going to sit there. Don't ask us any questions because we're not going to participate at all. We're just going to passively receive information. Is that a meeting? And the answer is yes. Just passively receiving information, if the council members are all together at the same place at the same time, constitutes a meeting under the Brown Act. And the requirements, these three fundamental requirements, must be met. There are several exceptions to the meeting requirement. There are exceptions where city council members can gather, a quorum of the city council can gather without their gathering constituting a meeting. One is for social and ceremonial events, but those exceptions are pretty hard to apply, and a good public lawyer will not rely on them except in a pinch. And if we have some time at the end of the discussion, we can talk about why it wasn't very wise for the entire city council to show up at the recent opening of the restaurant at the Hotel Laguna. Okay, so let's take a look at the three fundamental Brown Act requirements in some detail. The first is public notice. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the notice requirements. There are two of them. There's a requirement to notice public meetings, and that's accomplished by posting an agenda. There are requirements about where the agenda has to be posted and when it has to be posted. There's also a requirement to provide the public with notice of every topic that will be discussed at a meeting. And that requirement is met by including an item for each topic that will be discussed at the meeting on the agenda. And the rule here is really simple. If a topic isn't on the agenda, it can't be discussed at the meeting. Here too, there are some exceptions, and there's an exception that you'll see the city council use at every city council meeting. And that's an exception for reports by the staff or by the council members. The Brown Act, though, says the reports have to be brief, and the word in the Brown Act is brief, and they have to be reports, not discussions. You will frequently see those reports extend on for a considerable period of time. And you'll also see discussions taking place when the topic should be merely a report. So, all right. Okay, so that's it for notice. The second fundamental Brown Act requirement is attendance. And here, pretty straightforward. The public has the right to attend public meetings. There are no secret meetings. The big exception is closed sessions. Closed sessions are contrary to the purposes of the Brown Act, but sometimes they're necessary. So there are lots of rules that the city has to follow in order to meet in private in a closed session. And I've laid out the two most important closed session requirements. The first rule, and it's a big one, closed sessions can only be conducted for topics that are explicitly included in the Brown Act. So there's a list of topic areas in the Brown Act for allowable closed sessions. They're called closed session exemptions because they're exemptions to the general rule that meetings must be conducted in public. And discussion of litigation is the most commonly used closed session exemption. The second rule, related to the first, is that the council can only discuss or take actions allowed by the closed session exemption that they're using to go into closed session. So if there's a closed session exemption for litigation, the council can talk about a specific lawsuit, can't talk about some other lawsuit, and it certainly can't talk about a personnel matter. I mean, a closed session agenda can have multiple items on the agenda, so the council could talk under one agenda item about a particular lawsuit, under another closed session agenda item about a personnel matter. That's perfectly legitimate. Okay, so the last fundamental Brown Act requirement is public comment. Again, pretty straightforward. Two requirements. The public always has the right to bring up a matter that's not on the agenda, but is within the jurisdiction of the city council. And you see that occurring at every city council meeting early on in the agenda. There's an item for public comment, and people talk about all kinds of stuff. There's also a right to comment on every item on the agenda prior to the city council's consideration of that item or at the time they consider it. And that includes closed sessions. The public has a right to comment on closed session agenda items. Okay, so with that minimal information, you are well on your way to identifying and resolving a lot of Brown Act issues. Probably, 75% or more of the issues that the city council is confronted with concerning the Brown Act. It's really not that complicated. I mean, I've heard people say that the Brown Act's complicated. It's really not, which is why it's so mystifying that the city just hasn't been able to comply. So what I want to do next is take what you've just learned and go through the city council's recent closed session violations. But before I do that, any questions about anything that I've discussed here? And I don't know if I'll be able to see if people have questions, how that comes up. So doesn't look like there are any questions. Is that okay? So let me.
Meryl, can you see everybody to see if there are any questions? Are people raising their hands?
Oh, I have a question. Gene Felder here, Kurt, or is it Ann? The city attorney at the start of almost every single city council meeting, the mayor would say, city attorney, is there anything from the closed session that you want to divulge? And he would say, no. And then here at the last meeting, he went on for about 5 minutes. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, so I didn't go through this, but there are requirements in the Brown Act that if certain actions are taken in closed session, those actions have to be reported out. And I think it's a pretty standard practice. I know I always did it. If there's nothing to be reported out in closed session, to go on the record and state that. But if the city council approves a settlement agreement in closed session, I know that's one of the items they have to report out. If they, if at the conclusion of labor negotiations with the employee unions, they reach a deal, there's a certain report that they've got to make on the record. They've also got to provide a written report. They've got to file a written report with the clerk. So, so that accounts for Phil's comments. There's also a statement that the city attorney should be making on the record at the beginning of the closed session. I'm not sure if that's occurring or not.
Progress.
Okay, I have another question, comment. 3 city council members passively receiving information, such as an environmental academic presentation, is a Brown Act open meeting violation? Question. Could Kurt cite the Brown Act section number? I couldn't find it when I went looking for it on the state's Brown Act list? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and contact me. I don't have the citation at my fingertips, but it's basically the section that says that a meeting occurs whenever a quorum of a legislative body meets. So
I have a question, Kurt. George Weiss here. So I believe that a lot of the committees that don't have a legislative function, Housing and Human Services Committee, for example, and the Environmental Sustainability Committee, none of these committees, most of them other than Planning, Design Review, Arts Commission, have a legislative function. Am I correct in that statement?
well, okay, so I should clarify. The Brown Act uses the word legislative body, but case law has clarified that the Brown Act applies to even quasi-judicial bodies, bodies that don't have any legislative role at all, but have a judicial role. So don't be misled by the word, by the fact that the Brown Act uses the term legislative body. Case law has gone on to really expand the applicability of the Brown Act.
But let me go deeper into that. So the Environmental Sustainability Committee it doesn't look like they have any judgment power, judicial authority either. All they have is an advisory role to city council to advise them on environmental issues.
Yeah.
So they might say you should ban plastics, and that will come in as an agenda bill if somebody sponsors it, but they'll make recommendations. They don't judge anything, they just advise and review. So my feeling is that if they got together as a unit of 9 people, or the other committees being 5 to 7, that's okay. Their official meeting, of course, is public, of course, but if a few of them got together or 5 of them got together to talk offline about the ocean health, that would be not a violation of the Brown Act. Is that correct?
So advisory bodies are subject to the Brown Act. So if there's a committee, an officially formed committee that's formed either by statute or by action of the city council, and so sometimes you've got to go back and look and see what the provenance of the committee is. But if it's formed by official action and it has an advisory role, it's subject to the provisions of the Brown Act.
Okay.
So if a quorum of that committee meets, then that committee needs to comply with the Brown Act requirements, or there's an illegal meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so first question I have is in the recent dust up regarding the city council, which of the 3 fundamental Brown Act requirements you think was involved? So it primarily was attendance at public meetings, right? The city council held an illegal closed session, but they also goofed up the notice of the closed session. So there was a notice problem. And of course, with an illegal closed session, the public's deprived of the right to comment. So they really hit all 3 bases. So let me go through the chronology so that you can see exactly what the city did wrong and how Village Laguna dealt with the situation. The city council meeting where the illegal closed session occurred was conducted on June 29th of this year, June 29, 2021. Before the June 29 meeting, two Village Laguna board members, Ann Keene and Ann Christoph, had a conversation with the city manager where the city manager told them that the council was going to take up discussion of the Hotel Laguna project and that they were going to take it up in closed session. And so Ann and Ann thought a bit about that and sent the city council members each a letter about the Hotel Laguna. And in the letter, they said, and by the way, you really can't meet on this in closed session. That would violate the Brown Act. Okay, so then skip ahead to August 10, the city council meeting where the council censured George for disclosing confidential information from the June 29 closed session. At that meeting, it became crystal clear that the council had ignored Village Laguna's June 28th letter. And at the June 29 meeting had discussed the Hotel Laguna in closed session and had even conducted a vote on lifting a stop work order on the hotel. But the noticing for that closed session was initiation of litigation. So the only thing they could have discussed in there was bringing a lawsuit. And we heard from 3 council members at the August 10th meeting that there was no discussion of litigation whatsoever. So that closed session violated the 2 main rules for closed session. Obviously, discussing a ongoing development project isn't one of the topics listed in the Brown Act, much less taking a vote on a stop work order. And again, the notice said that the council was going to discuss initiation of litigation, and that wasn't at all the topic that was discussed. George had brought this information to light sometime after the August 10 meeting, sometime before the August 10 meeting, but at the August 10 meeting, it was on the record. And you heard several city council members say no discussion of litigation of the closed session and that there was a vote. And so after some discussion, Village Laguna decided that important issues were at stake here, that the council really shouldn't meet in private, and that we needed to take steps to enforce the Brown Act. So let's talk for a second about Brown Act enforcement. There are 3 enforcement paths. 2 civil enforcement paths that can be taken by any person, and a criminal enforcement path that can only be taken by the district attorney. Let's talk first about the criminal enforcement path, which we can dispense of pretty quickly, because I know that as of 2016, there had never been a criminal prosecution for violating the Brown Act. I don't believe there has been one since 2016 either. It just doesn't happen. And the reasons are made plain by this slide that has the elements that have to be proved for a criminal violation of the Brown Act. And the bottom line is that the district attorney would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a council member knew that he or she was violating the Brown Act. To see why this is really hard, let's look at the city council's recent Brown Act violations. And at the start, it looks like a pretty good case for a criminal violation. I mean, Village Laguna sent each of the council members a letter saying, don't do it, right? So they knew that they were violating the Brown Act when they went into closed session, arguably. But what are they going to say? They're going to say, Yes, but when we went into the closed session, the city attorney was sitting there next to us, and we rely on the city attorney to keep us on track. And we sincerely believed that if we were violating the Brown Act, if this was an illegal meeting, the city attorney would have said something, and he didn't say anything at all. And by the way, we continue to believe that that closed session was perfectly legal. Look at his recent letters to the district attorney. It's really hard to misprove. If somebody says this is their state of mind is X, it's really hard to prove that it's something other than X. And so for that reason, criminal prosecutions of the Brown Act, virtually impossible to prove. So let's look at the civil path. There are two paths here. What distinguishes the two paths is whether the violations are correctable or not. The violations that the city committed arguably could have gone either way, but Village Laguna determined to treat them as correctable violations. And for that reason, Village Laguna sent the city a cure or correct letter that said, you violated the Brown Act by conducting a meeting about the Hotel Laguna in closed session. Please cure that violation by conducting an open meeting, an open and public meeting on the Hotel Laguna. And you illegally voted on lifting the stop work order. Please reconsider that in a public meeting. And at the August 24th City Council meeting, the council did exactly that, curing the violation. So, end of story? Not quite. Following the August 24th City Council meeting,
I lost you there.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
The district attorney sent the council a letter about the closed session violations. And the letter's odd, right? Because it starts out by saying that it was likely that the city council violated the Brown Act by holding a closed session meeting on June 29. And then it goes on to say that George likely violated the Brown Act by disclosing information from that closed session. And those two things cannot both be true, right? If the city council's meeting was an illegal closed session, which it was, no question about it, then George couldn't have violated the Brown Act by disclosing information about that meeting because illegal closed sessions don't give rise to a duty of confidentiality. And then moreover, there's a specific provision of the Brown Act that says if a council member discloses that an illegal closed session was conducted, provides an opinion that an illegal closed session was conducted, that's not within the prohibition of disclosure of confidential information, including disclosing the circumstances of that meeting. I think it was Penny Milne who actually first mentioned this, Penny Milne from Candu, who pointed this out at the council meeting where George was censured. I looked it up and she's right, it's right there in the Brown Act. So it's obviously just patently not true that George violated the Brown Act. So it's a real mystery why the DA said that in his letter. The other thing the DA's letter did was require the city to take certain actions in the future to prevent Brown Act violations from occurring. The most significant of those actions was to require the city to tape record closed session meetings for 6 months. It's kind of a big deal. I mean, it would really put a damper on those closed sessions. The other requirements were really not I don't think all that meaningful. The city responded to the DA's letter with a letter of its own. The city attorney wrote a letter to the DA asking for a meeting with the DA and saying, we didn't violate the Brown Act, and gave a bunch of reasons why. I'm not going to go through that letter. It is replete with factual omissions, misstatements of the law. I mean, we could be here all night. Just
No.
all the problems that were
Yeah,
contained in
I'm
that
listening to the
letter.
Village Laguna meeting about the Brown Act. Can you shut the sound off on this if you can't hear it?
So Village Laguna did respond to the city attorney's letter by sending a letter to the DA, pointing out all the problems with the city attorney's letter and asking that the DA not let the city off the hook by giving the city a basis for saying that no Brown Act violation occurred. And apparently that happened. I mean, the city manager and the city attorney met with the DA following the city attorney's letter. And apparently they were unable to convince the DA that that the city had complied because the DA sent a second letter. The second letter pulled back the requirement that the city tape record its meetings, but the DA continued to insist that the city needed to take certain actions to ensure that violations wouldn't occur in the future. Any Brown Act violations wouldn't occur in the future. Okay, so where does that leave us? Really, what's been accomplished because of all this? I think the most important thing is that there's a heightened awareness of the Brown Act and the city's noncompliance with the Brown Act. And hopefully this causes the city to focus more on Brown Act compliance, which is important because the underlying purpose of the Brown Act is to ensure community involvement in local affairs. It's a basic right. And there can be no community involvement if the city starts conducting its business in private under the guise of closed session meetings. And this may be too optimistic, but it would be a big benefit if the dust up over the Brown Act caused the city and council members to focus on their other legal obligations. And here I'm thinking primarily of CEQA, which the city really mangles, but that's a discussion for another day. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Kurt. That was really informative. If you have a question, you may unmute yourself and ask or raise your hand.
Well, there's one question that's come through. Why would the DA's office pull back the recording requirement?
All anybody can do is speculate why the DA would do that. My own guess would be that the DA realized that the city had cured its Brown Act violation. I had to read the city attorney's letter 3 times before I saw that wedged into a paragraph in this really long letter was a really short sentence saying that in response to a demand from a community group, city attorney couldn't write Village Laguna, that the city had cured and corrected its violations. So, that would be my hunch, that he figured out that the violation had been cured. And so he wasn't willing to impose a measure as draconian as taping the city council meetings.
Okay, well, I guess this is just my comment. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And the Brown Act violation is smoke. It's not the fire. The fire is corruption in the city. Why would the city hide this vote? Why would the city ignore residents over and over and over again to whatever the big developers want? Why would they let Mohammed Honaker skate? Why would they let his stop work orders of the city just go, like unrecognized? Why do they have to, retroactively give permits to Mohammed Honaker? There's corruption in the city. That's the fire. So how do we get the district attorney to actually investigate the fire and not be, distracted by the smoke?
Well, I think you'd need some facts, right? You need some factual basis to think that they're.
No, what we need is an investigation. We need these people put under oath, where if you tell a lie, you go to jail, not like you tell a lie and you get backslapped by the big developers. We need under oath. That's what we need.
Yeah, I mean, but in order for the district attorney to, for example, convene a grand jury and start questioning people under oath, you need some facts supporting the contention that there's corruption in the city. I mean, my own belief is that the city's just gotten sloppy, right? That they're messy in the way that they conduct their affairs. And
well, I understand that. But on the other hand, Councilman Blake was not messy when he got a $2 million sweetheart loan to buy his own building and then invested, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars in renovating it. The loan was apparently sweetheart through a developer. It's kind of murky at this point. I mean, the guy couldn't rub two nickels together, and all of a sudden, he's making all this money. He was spotted walking up and down Laguna Beach businesses with Mohammed Honaker promoting the hotel. So there's a lot of evidence here that we need an investigation, at least an investigative reporter. There's obviously corruption going on here.
So, I mean, that is there has been, at least in one instance, a Fair Political Practices Commission, what I believe is a Fair Political Practices Commission violation. But again, I think it's people just being really messy and not really focusing as carefully as they should on what in a lot of cases are really simple and straightforward requirements, but requirements that have to be attended to and complied with.
Hey, Merrill, if I may, to piggyback on your passion plea for more digging into it, may I make a suggestion that we, just like we focused on the Brown Act, that we asked the board to focus on the issue of corruption in Laguna and see what we can do going forward.
Yeah, and at the very least, the board has to retract the so-called censure of George Weiss. I mean, it's so obviously wrong in their part. They have to retract that.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question?
I would like to make a comment. First of all, this matter of the violation of Brown Act is low-hanging fruit for Village Laguna. And we don't have to prove or ask for grand juries or investigations. I think the DA has done what the DA will do. It's now up to us to put political pressure. And that is, let's look at what is going on here that we can prove. We can prove that the council asked to have the DA rescind the original requirement to record all closed sessions for 6 months. And our rhetoric should be, what is this council trying to hide and trying to keep from hiding from the public? Because that is what is going on. And we need to do this because we've got to keep our eyes on the ball, folks. We've got Tony's seat we're going to have to defend, plus 2 other seats. And we've got 3 council members who work in conjunction with one another in this attempt to hide from the public. That's what the whole idea of the closed session was. It's the DA asked for these things. These folks had access to the DA. And just because the DA relented doesn't mean that council shouldn't say, look, this is what the DA asked originally. We should still want our sessions just to show we're showing good faith. And that's what we should be asking for and demanding, and get them on record to say why they're not for something like that. So
thank you. I'm taking a look at the time. I'd like to thank Kurt for all his hard work and good information that we have. If you still have questions, you can either send them to Village Laguna or email Kurt directly. And really appreciate everything you've dug up for us, Kurt. And I really appreciate the clean and clear explanation. Yay, thank you. And I want to go ahead and move on to our next presentation. It's by Gene Felder. And Gene and Johanna have lived in Laguna since 1986, and he has donated a significant amount of time to issues of public policy. Gene is the treasurer of Laguna Residents First. His presentation tonight will address questions that have been raised about the initiative. And he will take questions at the end, or you can put them into the chat as he's talking. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Gene.
Well, thank you, Ann. Hopefully tonight, Village Laguna will endorse the beautiful Laguna Overlay Zone. And this is a ballot initiative. In addition to being represented by assemblymen and state senators and city council members, the citizens of California, we can make law by ourselves by the initiative process. And that's what we're trying to do through the ballot initiative. The summary of the ballot initiative here in Laguna Beach: if passed, major projects within 750 feet of Coast Highway or Laguna Canyon Road would require voter approval only if they exceeded 22,000 square feet of total floor area, or worsen traffic with extra 200 average daily trips, or worsen parking by providing less parking than currently required, or exceed the current height limit, or combine several lots to create mega lots. And there's a lot of exceptions. So this is primarily aimed at commercial development. So single family residential projects are excluded. Residential projects of 9 units or less are excluded. So if somebody has a residential project, an apartment complex of 10 units, then it could be covered. It excludes 100% affordable residential units. Schools, hospitals, museums, or house of worships are excluded. Repair, restoration, or reconstruction of existing building which has been damaged by disasters are excluded. And any projects that are currently approved prior to passage are excluded. I thought it'd be helpful to respond to the guest view that was put in the Laguna Beach Independent by Joe Hanauer. In it, he said, quote, small 1,500 square foot retail stores converting to a grocery or restaurant with a daily trip increases of 200 cars demand a public vote. Think about it. A public vote after years of an expensive city approval process. Small businesses would then need to spend $100,000 plus on ballot fees and promotion with no clue of how the public will vote, unquote. So the problem, if you have a boutique, say a clothing store, and you turn it into a grocery store or restaurant, that is clearly an intensification of use. So that is exactly the type of thing where are you providing enough parking? And the city's municipal code requires parking. And so the city council might very well feel like Joe Hanauer feels, say, well, if they want to change it to a restaurant, what the heck? They don't have any parking, we'll just waive it. And that would require a vote of the people. The business is required by the city to provide additional parking spaces or pay into the parking in lieu fund. Waiving this would require a vote of the people, but following the municipal code would not. In his article, Joe Hanauer also wrote, quote, projects greater than 9 apartments. Would we ever add any apartments over 9 units if a public vote was required, unquote. So residential development less than 10 units are exempt from the ballot initiative. If 10 units or more meet all the provisions of the municipal code, that is height, parking, average daily trips, it would not trigger a vote of the people unless a combination of lots or exceeding 22,000 square feet of total floor area. So offhand, a 10-plex shouldn't have those problems. So it wouldn't be a vote of the people. Combining lots totaling, this was also in Joe Hanauer's article, quote, combining lots totaling 7,501 square feet, lots would comprise a new 7,501 square foot lot, are considered substandard. So why not enable 2 substandard lots to be combined without the time, expense, and risk of a public vote, unquote. So within the overlay district, lot combination is limited to 7,500 square feet. It's limited to 6,000 square feet in the downtown without voter approval. There's also an exemption for cleaning up very small lots of less than 12,000 square feet. But here's the thing that's important in the ballot initiative. Over the years, Laguna Beach has developed a unique commercial district consisting of an organic mosaic. Individual buildings that were built and then redeveloped at different times by different owners. The years have left Laguna with a pleasing and eclectic pattern of development that should be preserved. One of the things that works about Laguna is that time has left us with this wonderful organic mosaic of shops, restaurants, and other buildings in the most visible parts of town. So we don't want, the combination of lots is a very important part and a good reason to vote for the ballot initiative. Mr. Hanauer also wrote, quote, major improvements of 22,000 square feet or greater. The old Pottery Place wouldn't exist today. One might say it's a great project and voters would have approved it, but there was opposition throughout the city process. Had it required a public vote after a 3-year city process and activists continuing negative disinformation, we wouldn't have pursued it, unquote. So this was the Pottery Shack. It's now called the Old Pottery Place. And it provides quite a bit of parking on site. So Joe Hanover's options could have been to provide all the municipal codes required parking or to obtain approval via a vote of the people. And in this guest view, he included the letter that he and other distinguished citizens in town wrote to Mayor Whalen. It included, the following are simply a few examples of added requirements that might be considered for larger developments. So, quote, stronger parking requirements. For example, rather than enable projects beyond a predetermined size to benefit from artificial parking capacity based on some historic decisions unrealistic today, grandfathered parking might be reduced or eliminated so that appropriate parking for projects that can truly impair traffic flow will be assured. So this is quite an interesting thing for him to throw into this letter. To eliminate grandfathered parking particularly due to preserving a historic structure, is far more radical than the ballot initiative. I don't know if I'm for it or against it, but it's quite a radical step to take. Also interesting, in his the distinguished citizen's letter to the mayor, it's got, quote, public input. For example, in order to ensure public input is considered prior to the planning commission and council analyzing proposals over a given size, a citizens forum could be offered, which would enable input to be provided for a proposed vote. Public input at such forum would not be limited to 2 or 3 minutes, unquote. So I think we could all get behind this idea. It might be a real Donnybrook, but I think it would be a great thing to discuss when a proposal comes up. The latest proposal that is being mentioned at community development right now, Mozambique is considering a 350 seat music venue. So that would be a nice meeting to attend. I would suggest bringing your boxing gloves to that one. So their idea would be the council could create a counter ballot initiative to be provided to voters so they could have an alternative to the Laguna residents' first proposal. This is not a brand new idea. This is often done when these type of ballot initiatives are on the ballot. The city will put a confusing alternate, rather good sounding alternate ballot initiative to try to confuse things. You might have also read a letter to the editor by Planning Commissioner George Dubin in this latest edition of the Indy. And in it, he includes, quote, in the past 5 years, there were roughly 18 projects and currently a dozen pending projects that would have to go before the entire community for an up or down vote. That's 30 projects. A rough estimate of the cost of special elections in noticing, staff time, voter pamphlets would be up to $60,000 each election, equaling to $1.8 million, unquote. Well, our goal is really not to have a vote of the people. It's not to have it all the time, but to moderate what the developers expect and what the developers will propose, and to moderate what the city council will approve. Laguna Beach is typically in the forefront, but Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, and Dana Point already have these types of ballot initiatives enacted. During the 20 years that Newport Beach has had this type of law, they have only had 3 projects voted on. So it apparently at least works in Newport Beach that you moderate what the developer expects, you moderate what they propose, and you moderate what the city council gives away. So as to the cost for the developer, they have the choice. The developer has to pay costs for the election, but they have a choice of a special election or the next general election. So the cost could be as little as $10,000 if the project is put on the ballot during the normal election cycle at a general election. The choice of a special election is up to the developer, in which case the cost could be $80,000 or higher. Now, you may have noticed that Joe Hanover said $100,000, George Dubin said $60,000, and here I've said $80,000. So God only knows what a special elections cost. Those are the kind of questions that has been coming up. The other ones actually I sent in a letter to the editor. It's kind of silly for me to quote from my own letter, but as I've been trying to act as a circulator, getting signatures for the ballot initiative, people say, don't we already have ordinances that specifying the maximum height of buildings? Doesn't that adequately protect us? And no, a majority vote of the city council or the planning commission can authorize exceeding the statutory height limit. In fact, the planning commission recently granted the Heisler Building permission to build a permanent elevator to stop up their temporary rooftop deck, creating a near 45-foot high structure higher than the 36 height limit. And of course, there's many places, particularly in the downtown specific area and near the beach, that there's a much lower height, 12 foot in many visible parts of town. So when people say they pledge to the 36-foot height limit, we want them to pledge to all the height limits that are currently in the municipal codes. The ballot initiative simply preserves the entire height restrictions that are currently in place. It would give more a law protecting the height limit than we currently have. And then the other question that comes up all the time is, somebody wants to repair their building, they want to fix up things, things are getting old and need repair. There is nothing in this initiative that impacts a business in town that desires to repair or refurbish their existing buildings. And there's lots of information at, what's WWW stand for? Well, anyway, LagunaResidentsFirst.org, including frequently asked questions and a summary of the ballot initiative. And I think Ann mentioned I was the treasurer of the Laguna Residents First. And actually, I haven't had much to do, but if you send lots of checks to me, I'll be very busy and very appreciative. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Okay, well, yes, and thank you, Gene. And also, just kind of building on your comment around the variance to the height limit that was granted. Sam Goldstein, who of course is part of the Liberate Laguna Forward cabal of developers, has also said that he can't make any money on a commercial building that's limited to 36 feet. And so he's saying that he wants the 36-foot height limit to only apply to residential units and not to commercial units. So I think that these developers are sort of, nipping at our heels and have clear plans to developing very, very big structures in our Laguna area.
Okay, I see Charlotte has her hand up. Charlotte? You're muted.
Yes. Hi, Jean. I've read that the Planning Commission gave some kind of approval to people in the downtown area, developers, that if they built underground parking, they could exceed the 36-foot height limit. What does that exactly mean with regard to the existing ordinance?
Well, I want to thank you very much for that question. I have no idea what the answer is.
Maybe I could talk to that one. That the height requirements in the current zoning for the height requirements in Laguna Beach are pretty complex. And as Gene pointed out, on Lower Forest, it's 12 feet, and 36 feet buildings on Forest Avenue would really change downtown in such a dramatic way. We'd have to change the Village Laguna logo for one thing, because it'd just be a canyon of buildings on Forest Avenue instead of what we have. But the treatment of say in residential, the treatment of basements, it doesn't make any difference if it's under or above. It's well, okay, there does in some cases. So there is a proposal to change the treatment of completely underground parking, like Mo is proposing at the Hotel Laguna. He wants to dig into the bluff there, put 3 stories of parking underground, And then the top would just be a U-turn, where the valet would take your car and drive it down to the depths of what used to be the bluffs. But that's still all pending. And if when the ballot initiative passes, it will be the parking that requirements we have in place right now, which doesn't include that, rather than whatever the city council may come up with in the next year.
So David, wouldn't that be below sea level?
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not an engineer, but to make the parking pencil out, he's got to do something because the rooms in the hotel are too small for the bridal suites and big other suites. So he wants to do something. So he's going to build 3 stories of suites up against Wayland's wall, and then just have a little bit of that U-turn area to pick up and drop off cars. So he's got to do something. That's his proposal. So he's going to whine and whine and whine, and who knows what the outcome of that will be. But yeah, at some point you run into the ocean.
But that's also into the bluff, wouldn't it? I mean, that's elevated bluff. So he would be digging into the bluff to put the 3 stories of parking.
Yeah, well, let's hope that the Coastal Commission has some say on that. But with Coastal Commission, it's overall, right? But thank goodness there is the Coastal Commission, but we can't always rely on them. But this hasn't even happened yet, so let's just pass the ballot initiative. Then the ballot initiative would have the parking requirements as it is today with the current interpretation of the parking levels and the height.
Thank you, Jacob, and then Charlotte.
Hi, couple questions. When you say the parking as it exists today, and that's part of this other question that I think would cover both. Ann Christoph wrote a very informative column some months ago about what happened in Dana Point, where the council there passed or approved some designs that would have not been allowed under their the initiative that they had. What's to prevent Laguna Beach Council from, at some point between now and the time that the initiative would go into effect, to pass the most onerous or singular kinds of approvals?
Well, this ballot initiative is an overlay, and it keeps into effect all the municipal code, all the requirements, and there are a lot of parking requirements. There are height limits. It's very detailed in the municipal code, and so this would have the process, as I say, of moderating what the developers would ask for. Because what they would like to do is they would like to not meet the requirements, but get the 3 votes on the city council and planning commission to give them a waiver, give them a variance, give them an okay. And if there is a project that works its way through the system before we pass this and it becomes law on November 8th, 2022, we face the same problem as Dana Point. So if there's a project, any project that is approved by the city council prior to November 8th, 2022, they could allow it to be higher. They could say you're required to have, like the Heisler building is something like required to have 270 parking spaces, and they provide 0. But they, at least that's a historic building, right? But Jacob, there's nothing that protects us from the city council doing what Dana Point, except for the sluggishness of the city staff that probably cannot hurry up a project even if they were told to do so.
Thank you. Charlotte, do you still, your hand is still up. Are you?
Let me just add one thing to that.
Okay, just
Is
a
that
minute.
there are two exceptions that are locked into what exists today. That would be the current height ordinance, and it was just copied word for word from the existing ordinance, and the current parking requirements. I mean, the developers are crying about the parking requirements being too restrictive, but they're what the town has been living with for decades. Does it seem like we have too much parking right now, or too little, or about right? If we were to take a poll, I don't think anyone would say we have too much parking downtown. So this is what the formula over decades has given us, and it's parking is pretty tight. You wouldn't want any looser than that. So I don't know what the developers are crying about, just to make us feel bad and eventually then force us to build a parking lot for them.
Thank you. Charlotte?
I guess I'm still going back to this whole underground parking in the downtown area. If we presume right now, if you have underground parking, that is considered one floor, so then you can only have, say, 2 above ground. Does it mean that if they get permission, if they build parking underground, that they can ignore that and build 36 feet above ground? Do I make sense? Nobody can answer that question.
No, our position obviously is no matter what you do subterranean, the height limit is above ground.
Thank you. Yeah.
And by the way, I'd like to take this opportunity to take a cheap shot at Sam Goldstein. He provides no parking, but his building happens to be right next to the Glen Eyrie parking structure. And he apparently can't provide a business for Tommy Bahama's and Tommy Bahama's restaurant when the business next door at Nick's has been a thriving business from the day they opened. So I would suggest either he is a lousy landlord or he's charging too much rent.
Hey, Jean,
If there's anybody from the press, I can be quoted on that.
Jean, I had a question. There's been a couple comments about how many, I think in the staff report and also in Hanukkah's letter, Hanover's letter, that there were.
I think Hanukkah wrote it and then Hanover.
I know.
I'm kidding.
Freudian slip. It stated that there were, I forget, 15 or 17 projects over the last year that would have had to been voted on. Is there a way to find out what projects they're talking about?
No, it's detailed in the agenda bill. Actually, the agenda bill that was written is a pretty good marketing piece for Laguna residents first. So we would have you read that. John Thomas did some digging into that, and it's. I read this someplace here. Where's my notes? Somebody said, yeah. So in George Dubin's letter, he said there's 18 projects and currently a dozen pending projects. I don't know how he added up that. So 30 projects, but most of these would be triggered by not providing enough parking. And one of the problems is that the city grants parking for historic structures like they did for the White House, like they did for the Heisler Building and so forth. But then they also grant other parking credits. The problem is that they're giving parking credits for parking spaces that don't exist. You know, it's kind of a funny thing. When we had that proposed parking structure out in the canyon 5 or 7 years ago, it kind of came out that it costs about, if you include the land, it costs about $100,000. And Mark Weiner confirmed this at the in the discussion, about $100,000 a parking space. Unfortunately, the city council parking in Luffy is $23,000 a parking space, but apparently they don't collect that very often. So John Thomas, has been pushing, why don't there's such a thing as merchants having a business improvement zone where they levy themselves to build things. So if the landlords are screwing the merchants, the least they could do is raise money, and maybe they could come forth with money or a stream of money over some years where they could build a parking structure instead of the Laguna residents paying for the parking structure. They pay for the parking structure. Now, our ballot initiative doesn't get into that because it's very complicated. As you know, there's been, Michael Hogue mentions many books about if you make a parking space, an additional parking space, you just make the congestion and parking worse. So we're not proposing a parking structure, but if anybody's going to pay for a parking structure, it ought to be the businesses that are benefiting from it. And if the business is supposed to, by municipal code, provide parking, they ought to pay a realistic parking in lieu fee.
Thank
And
you.
can I just add for the first part of that question about can we get a list? There is a list. There's actually been 2 staff reports. There's one, the first one that the staff just had a general report. We worked with staff and as Gene says, they made 6 corrections that we suggested. And it was a very good working relationship in the early days. And it is almost an advertising piece for us. It was good. The second staff report was to allocate funds to do a financial analysis. And even Bob somebody asked Bob, what does a financial analysis of this mean? And he wasn't quite sure, but Sheree assures us there are companies that will do a good job. I wonder what the answer is on that they're going to come up with. But anyway, on that report, they had this 30. That was where they got the 30 properties. And as Gene pointed out, most of these are parking exemptions that have already been granted. You know, the ballot initiative does not go back and try to reclaim parking exemptions that were granted either in 1958 for the grandfathered or over the years through historic property preservation or, you know, any of the other parking exemptions that have already been granted. You know, that's water over the bridge. What it does do is that if the council is going, or planning commission and recommends to the council has new parking exemptions. They have to have a finding, and the finding has to show 1, that it's in the public interest to do that, and 2, that it does not impact the neighborhoods. And somebody's going to fight against that. I mean, that's just common sense. It does really seem now that the city grants parking exemptions without determining if it really is in the public interest. And they are doing it without regard as the impact on the neighborhoods. And all the ballot initiative does is these common sense things, and we're being railed against because we're asking for this 2 common sense criteria that planning commission gets to decide. I just don't see the logic. I mean, the developers are asking for too much in that case.
Well, thank you very much. It's really been a lot of interesting information. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacob, you have your hand up. I didn't see you.
Actually, I was just trying to hit the emoji clapping. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Clap. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. We all are. So at this point, if you are not a Village Laguna member, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and log off. We appreciate having our guests here, but we're going to have a members only meeting. And so if you aren't a member as of last month, if you'd go ahead and log off, thank you for coming. And our treasurer, Mary Ives, is double checking to make sure that the people who are logged on are official members. And we're going to go ahead and, if I can have a motion to support the initiative. And you can unmute yourselves if you care to. I'm going to see where we are with all this. So Mary, are we all set?
Yeah, the person who's identified as Deborah and the person who's identified as iPhone Joan. Could you identify yourself so I can check to see if you remember?
I don't know that my wife has a microphone on. That's C. Deborah Lawton.
That's Deborah Weiss.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
she goes by her own name, Armando. I haven't encouraged her to change it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, iPhone Joan is Joan McFarlane.
Okay, thank you. Then we're good to go.
I don't know what
Great.
happened. They were asking.
Thank you.
And,
Yes,
can you hear me?
I can.
I don't know why I'm not showing up anywhere. I tried to hide myself, but I'm here, so.
I see your name, but it looks like you're just a
Okay, all right.
computer.
Great, thanks.
By the way, Armando's
Rick's
been waiting.
here
to
also, he's a member.
Armando wants to be noticed.
I know, but I've been trying to avoid him.
Oh, okay. All right. You want to ignore him. That's right.
Story of my life.
Go ahead, Armando.
We love you, Armando.
Thank you very much, Johanna. I love you too. So I wanted to claim the honor of moving that Village Laguna endorse the ballot initiative developed by Laguna Residents First.
And is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, and is that David?
Yes.
All right, it's hard to track everybody. Further discussion? Would anyone care to make some comments? Seeing none, Meryl, do you see any? I'm trying to look at everybody.
No, I don't.
Okay. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand, because some of you are muted and some are not.
Hi.
I'm in favor.
Okay.
Oh,
So are we going to get a count? Because this is a, do we need a count?
No, it looks right. It looks good.
Raise the hand symbol. Yeah.
6.
Okay, and all those opposed?
oh, I want to put my hand up.
All right, Meryl, are you seeing anyone opposed? I'm having trouble seeing everybody.
I think there's some people that still have their hand up, perhaps from the one from that question before.
Okay. All right. I just found my hand.
Armando,
Okay.
get up.
I'm going to lower it.
All right, so if you are opposed, please put your hand up now. I think everybody's hands are down.
Armando, put your hand down.
I'm doing.
Okay, so it's looking like we're unanimous. Am I missing anyone?
All right. Wow.
Yeah, no hands up.
So-
Yes.
That's good.
And Meryl, if you could get a count of how many we have online at this point.
26.
Thank you. So I'm going to say that it's a unanimous count and we've voted to endorse. And hooray.
Hey.
And getting to see Ed Merrilies was the highlight of my evening.
We appreciate
Haven't
that,
seen him in
yeah.
so long.
No, really appreciate that endorsement and all your faith and most people on the call have also helped with the signature gathering and financially and thank you all.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It was a really good meeting, so informative. Thank you, Kurt and Jean, such good speakers and so much good information. Really appreciate your hard work. Good night, everybody. Be
Oh,
safe.
and I have an announcement.
Oh, go ahead.
The Laguna Canyon Conservancy, concerned about the Sacramento, the state of California, taking over local control and concerned about the oil spill. Our speaker on Monday, November the 1st, will be our Assemblywoman, Cody
Cody.
Norris.
Cody.
Okay, I don't know her name, but
Cody Petrie Norris.
thank you very much. Anyway, the LCC Zoom meeting, 7 o'clock, November 1st. If you want to attack somebody from Sacramento, join in the fun.
Thank you, Jean. Any other announcements before we say goodnight?
Except she's from Laguna Beach.
Yeah.
All right, don't attack her, support her.
Yeah.
We do.
Can I say
Yes,
something?
Johanna?
Has everybody signed the petition that is on Zoom right now? You don't have to raise your hand. It's kind of a question to think about. And if you haven't, there are people usually at the post office or at the farmer's market, or call me and I'll bring a petition over.
And what's the deadline?
497-4525. 497-4525. Okay.
What's the deadline?
We
Well,
have
let's-
basically.
We're
till the
trying to
end
get
of
them in the next like several weeks. So just let's work hard to get all the signatures we can and see where we're at on that.
How are we doing on signatures at this time?
We're doing good. We're doing good. We're over halfway there.
But there's only a few more weeks, so it seems like we've really got to push.
And we need more
Yep.
signatures.
Yeah.
We need your cousins and your neighbors.
Are we ready for us to start signing toys? Oh,
And Norman's been great help. Norman and Cheryl. Thank you, Norman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I set up in front of Coast Hardware, and that's a pretty good spot some of the time because there's a lot of residents that come in there.
Okay. All right. Great.
It's good.
All right. Again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Anne.
Night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, Meryl.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Kurt.